would you say your deepest, darkest fear is? I think mine is dying and no one remembering me. But also that I'm being annoying and that nobody tells me. SIMBIB. Hello folks, welcome back to Stuff I Make Because I'm Bored. My name is Sin and I will be your host, and today I want to talk about Orion and the Dark, the latest release from Dreamworks through Netflix. I was browsing through Netflix, which I honestly almost never do since I'm very busy watching 300 YouTube videos back to back, when I came across Orion and the Dark. I'd heard some buzz about it on Xter/Twitter/whatever it's called now, since I follow one of the artists who worked on the concept art for the film, and I decided, you know what, let's give it a shot. It's certainly more fun to talk about than the economy, I will tell you that much. As usual, I will go through my thoughts on the movie without spoilers first, and then dive into spoiler territory later. So let's get started. Part 1, spoiler-free review. Orion and the Dark is a cute little story about overcoming your fears, featuring Jacob Tremblay as the lead Orion. He is afraid of basically everything: dogs, mosquitoes, bees, murder clowns, and of course his biggest fear of all, the dark. In the movie, he meets the personification of the dark, played by Paul Walter Hauser, who is determined to help Orion overcome his fears, and to show him that nighttime and the darkness aren't as bad as they seem. The movie itself is beautiful. I adored the colors and the crayon-like textures. You can see it in the hair, in Orion's shirt, and the further things fade in the distance, the more textured and stylized it becomes. It's a lot like Puss in Boots in that way. The whole movie feels a lot like illustrations come to life. Speaking of, there are some excellent scenes with small doodles drawn by Orion illustrating various scenarios that scare him, that were also fun and engaging to watch without breaking the flow of the film. The character design was pretty solid. There were some characters that I thought were executed a bit better than others. For starters, there's at least 4 movies I can think of off the top of my head where the male lead looks like this. But that's nitpicking, I know. Sweet Dreams was gorgeous, but I especially loved Sleep. I mean, look at it. That's a Muppet. The music was also fine. At the start of the movie, when Orion is walking around dejected, there was one piece of music that very strongly reminded me of Up, but other than that, I can't think of anything that particularly stood out to me. It created a soft, cohesive feeling for the movie, and worked together with the visuals very well. I really want to learn more about music so that I can give you like a better, more thoughtful breakdown on the score. The voice acting was also pretty decent. I enjoyed the lead's performance, for the most part. There were a couple deliveries that were a little odd. He has a great scream.
I'm dark! Ta-da!
And also, I don't know what specifically it was, but there was something about Dark's performance that just felt weird. Not sure if it was held back, but it felt a little out of place sometimes, like it didn't fit into the fabric of the story somehow. Looking up the voice actor, Paul Walter Hauser, it turns out that he is a comedian and an actor, so I guess that just tracks for people who are not voice actors doing voice acting roles, so I guess that probably explains his performance. For the story itself, I enjoyed it. While the beats were a bit standard, it presented them with a twist that I wasn't expecting. It does still fall victim to the whole, oh no, the main character and their friend have a falling out that needs to be resolved in the 3rd act thing, but it felt justified, and I think they handled it pretty well. It's a very approachable story that I'm sure kids could relate to, and even now as an adult, I felt very hurt by the anxieties that Orion has throughout the film, even down to the ways that he tries to cope with them and how they affect him. This movie does remind me a lot of Inside Out, actually. Especially with Dark and his fellow night entities and the way that they banter, and most especially the similarities between anxiety and insomnia. But that just kind of is what happens when you write a character whose whole shtick is be anxious. All in all, it's a fun time. It's only about an hour and a half, which is certainly one of the shorter movies that's on my list. I wanted to watch the new Batman with Robert Pattinson, but that movie is like 3 hours long. What the hell? So if this movie sounds like it's your jam, definitely give it a watch. It's on Netflix. Now, moving on to spoiler territory. You have been warned. Spoilers begin in 3, 2, 1. Part 2 spoilers. Orion and the Dark opens to Orion walking through the playground during recess, working up the courage to talk to a girl he likes, Sally, but ultimately failing. Through his voiceover narration, we learn that Orion is afraid, basically, of everything. He says that the school counselor told him to keep a record of his fears so that he can work through them, and he does this through his sketchbook entries. Very relatable, by the way. At the end of his school day, he tries to sneak out of the classroom without giving his teacher a permission slip for a field trip that his class is supposed to go on the next Monday. His excuse for the teacher is that his parents don't believe in space. when in fact he's just scared of going. He mentions how terrifying it is to be on a school bus, unbuckled, going down the highway where any accident could just happen and be catastrophic, which, yeah, I agree. It's insane that we let this happen. Why don't school buses have seatbelts? Why don't normal buses have seatbelts? Why do we let this happen? In the end, as he's about to head home, he is approached by Sally, who asks if he'd like to sit with her at the planetarium. Afraid, Orion doesn't answer her, and she gets called by her parents to their car for her ride home. As he walks home, we see a bit more of the city in which he lives, and we get to that song that I mentioned that reminds me so much of Up. When he gets there, his mom's baked him cookies, and hidden in those cookies is said permission slip that he had apparently tried to hide in the couch cushions. I really like the way that the adults are written throughout the movie. You could even see it in the way that the teacher smiled at Orion when he told her his parents didn't believe in space. None of them treat him poorly because of his fears, and they all work together to encourage him to work through them. His mom tells him that it's okay and normal to be nervous about the field trip, which is true, but also that sometimes you have to feel the fear and do the thing anyway. Which I think is an excellent message to give to kids, even if Orion disagrees. Later that night, as he's getting tucked into bed, we see what truly scares Orion more than anything else, even more than death, the dark. And as he lays there fretting about it, he finally breaks and starts screaming.
Curse you, darkness! Where cruel aberrations hide within your inky cloak of darkness!
And out of the shadows comes Dark, the full personification and manifestation of the dark itself, here to tell Orion that he's sick and tired of Orion screaming his head off every night and making it difficult for Dark and his friends to get work done. He tells Orion that Orion's not the only one scared of him. In fact, he keeps a running tab of everybody who is, millions of people. But Orion is by far the loudest and the most hurtful. And as they're both sitting on Orion's bed, Dark laments that it's okay for Orion to be scared, but that he just wishes that people would give him a chance. And this connects with Orion as somebody who's also picked on by others, and is afraid of other people's opinion of him. So when Dark offers to help Orion overcome his fears by showing him what he does in a night, Orion agrees to go with him, reluctantly, and they blast off through the roof into the sky. And then, suddenly the movie is interrupted by a new voice, a girl's voice, who says that she knows what her dad is doing in telling her this story, and it throws the whole movie into a new light. This is not a journey that we're going on with Orion. We're actually listening to a story that grown-up Orion is telling his daughter to help her overcome her fear of the dark the same way that he did. It's a bit Princess Bride in that way, but it does give me some complicated feelings toward the movie. The concept isn't a problem, or even anything new, but I wonder if the story is somehow lessened a bit by the implication that it's just a story, even in the narrative of the film, and that the events portrayed in the film aren't real. Which, I mean, that's what all movies are. That's what narration is, in a way, but I don't know. It's weird and meta. I didn't mind it in The Princess Bride because you go in knowing that it's a story. I don't know. I'm probably thinking too hard about it. Anyway, Orion and his daughter Hypatia have a short conversation about Orion's story, and she reveals that she wrote a poem about the dark, which she's hesitant to share. This is another time that I feel they did a really good job writing the adult characters. Orion praises her and her research, and calls her a poet even when she doesn't feel like one yet, and encourages her to share it, but doesn't pressure her when she doesn't want to. She asks Orion to continue his story, and we picked up where we left off, with Dark and young Orion soaring into the dark night. And this is a wonderful sequence as Dark pulls his cloak across the sky, the darkness bleeding into the light in inky patches with the bright stars shining. He tries to show Orion the beauty that he brings, but Orion just sees his fears, or his allergies.
Pretty awesome, huh?
I'm allergic to fireflies.
Eventually, Dark lets on that there's more entities than just him, and brings Orion to a small roadside cafe where we meet the other night entities. Insomnia, Quiet, Unexplained Noises, Sleep, and Sweet Dreams, who are playing poker together while on their break between time zones. Though Dark is excited to introduce them to Orion, they are not very excited to see Orion, for the same reasons that Dark showed up to him for in the first place. But Dark convinces the others to let Orion watch them work so that he can be less afraid. And so Dark and Orion do just that. They follow the other entities around and watch them do their thing. But instead of watching and learning, Orion becomes more afraid and in fact even judges the entities for the jobs that they do. Though really, I have to side with Orion on this one, especially when it comes to sleep and their methods. but also I don't really see the purpose of unexplained noises and insomnia. I'm sure they both tell me that I don't understand the delicate balance of nature or something, but aren't quiet and unexplained noises like polar opposites? How can they both exist and have their jobs at night? For that matter, why split up the concept of sleeping into 3 different entities? Like, if sleep's whole purpose is to put people to sleep, and insomnia's job is to stop people from sleeping, aren't they antithetical to each other? Why do they both have this job? Rise of the Guardians, also a Dreamworks film, also had the concept of sleep as a character. Namely, he was the Sandman, and his job was both putting people to sleep and providing them with dreams. In fact, Rise of the Guardians also has a character who was the personification of darkness who didn't like the fact that people didn't like him and— wait a minute, that sounds really familiar. My point being that it would have made more sense to me if sleep, insomnia, and sweet dreams didn't all exist. Maybe cut sleep and keep insomnia and change sweet dreams into just dreaming? I fail to see the purpose in having a character whose job it is to make people fall asleep work side by side with a character whose job it is to keep them awake. And also them working with somebody who shapes their dreams, but only good ones and not nightmares? It feels a bit needlessly complicated. Anyway, back to the movie. The last entity Orion and Dark follow is Sweet Dreams, who they follow into the dream of a woman named Irene. Sweet Dreams shows off how she can delicately create a dream to help the person whose mind she's in deal with the problems from their subconscious. However, once in the dream, Orion accidentally starts to influence it and creates a nightmare based on his own fears.
Hey there, Irene. Time for your yearly checkup.
From which they barely escape with their lives. No, really.
Unless, of course, he dies. Then he dies in real life.
Wait, what?
Once out, Sweet Dreams scolds Orion for almost ruining everything, for which Dark agrees. Orion almost ruined everything, but he didn't, because he was brave and looked his fears in the eyes. And though Orion tries to prove him wrong, Dark emphasizes that Orion has gotten better at overcoming his fear. After all, Orion's no longer afraid of Dark. And it's with this realization that Orion continues to travel across the world with Dark and the other entities, only this time it's different. He's starting to see the beauty in what Dark and the other entities do. Even insomnia and unexplained noises, I guess. Later, as they settle in for another between time zones break, Orion tries to cheer up Dark after they saw a kid crying because he was so afraid. And Dark says that the thing he's really scared of is that he's exactly what other people say that he is, and he's not actually a good person at all. And I really resonated with that. I have days where I look very negatively at myself, and I'm always worried that I've somehow tricked the people that I know into liking me, and that they'll all realize one day that actually I suck and they should all hate me. It's not so much a fear of being outcast by others, but that others are right and justified to outcast you. Toward the end of their break, as they head outside, they once again see light peering above the horizon, and as the night entities sneer at it, Orion mentions that actually he kind of likes the light, and that it makes him feel welcome and safe. Light and Dark share a bit of banter here, where Light gently riffs at and belittles Dark at the same time, claiming that Dark is just insecure because Light is so much better than him in every single way, he just projects those insecurities onto Light. Which is a bit of paraphrasing, but I'll be honest, I'm with Dark on calling Light a bit of a dick. In fact, I think people like Light are the worst kinds of dicks. The narcissists who believe they're so much better than their equals, even though the work that they do is exactly the same. Anyway, we cut back to adult Orion and Hypatia as they decide to take a walk around the town at night. And as they both decide to take the bright, loud route, Hypatia asks why Orion said in the story that he was no longer afraid of the dark when in reality, he still kind of is. And she has a great point here about how many stories that parents tell their children being uncomplicated, since those kinds of stories are easier to tell and always have a happy ending. Adult Orion agrees, and so they decide that they'll incorporate Orion still being afraid of the dark into their story. So we cut back to young Orion and Dark, and this is where the setup happens for the third act. You know, the main party breaks up when then they come back together later, that thing. Orion is bested by his fear and refuses to go inside a dark room, making various excuses. And as the other entities question him, he starts explaining why he likes the dawn and the light, how it makes him feel safe, how vibrant and beautiful the world is in daytime. And as he's essentially hyping up daytime, and so doing, putting down dark, the entities start getting won over by him, and they even start to resent Dark for keeping them in the dark.
You're saying the problem is Dark?
Well, in a way, yeah. And I love him, but I guess he's the issue here, right?
And all of this eventually culminates in all the night entities quitting the team. Sad and dejected, abandoned and lonely, Dark decides to sit on a flying turtle with Orion and wait for daytime himself, rather than being alone forever. Despite what Orion says to convince him to go, he stays, and light passes over them both, and Dark is Thanos. Nice going, Orion! And this is where we come back to adult Orion and his daughter, now at the planetarium, when she asks him what happens next. Orion says he doesn't know because he ran out of ideas, so Hypatia offers to build her ideas on his story. And together they continue, where she promptly writes herself into the story. And if that's not the most relatable thing ever, you did not engage in media the same way that I did as a kid. And also now. Hypatia meets young Orion as he steps off the turtle onto a sandy beach somewhere in Europe maybe, and shares her plan with him to bring all the night entities back together by reading out her poem. It is a nice poem, and I agree with it, but this is the part where it feels a little bit like the writer's voice is overshadowing the characters a little. There's not much of an environmental message in the movie, but there is one about light and noise pollution. Yeah, I agree with Hypatia. It is weird that we made cities so bright that we can't see the stars. It is weird that it's so loud at night that we can't even hear the wind through the leaves. I don't know if that's specifically the character coming to that conclusion though, or if it's the writers. It does feel like Hypatia's thoughts, but since we haven't heard any of her opinions earlier than this, it makes it feel a little bit out of left field. Her poem works though to summon the other night entities back, and Hypatia says that though in the real world Dark is gone, he still exists in Orion's memories, and if Orion goes to sleep, Sweet Dreams and Hypatia could enter Orion's dream and pull Dark out to bring back the proper night. And they go through with it, and though they narrowly escape certain death, they do end up saving Dark and bringing back the proper nighttime. After this, they finally get back to Orion's house, and Orion and Dark say their goodbyes. But this is not the end of the story. Oh no. After all, Hypatia's there, and she is Orion's daughter. How is she supposed to get back home? She lives 20 years in the future. Thankfully, this is exactly when Tycho arrives, the time-traveling warrior who came here from the future to bring Hypatia back to the proper timeline. But they must hurry, because the longer they stay here, the more time monsters show up. Wait, wasn't that the plot of a Doctor Who episode? Hypatia and Orion say farewell, and Hypatia and Tycho battle their way through the monsters and take off in the time capsule, returning Hypatia to when she was from. And this is where we zoom out again, once more, to an adult Hypatia talking to her son Tycho as he continues explaining the ending to their story, and she thanks him for figuring out how to finish it. She tucks him in and heads out to the porch, where her now much older dad Orion is relaxing. They have a short exchange and Hypatia turns in for the night, and we end the movie with Orion sitting there next to his wife Sally, looking up at the real stars. And I love the little details in this movie. I like that Orion and Hypatia both have vivid imaginations and that they express it through their art. I love that Hypatia mentions that she misses the stars, and so she moved away from the city so she can see them. And I love how Orion met Sally at the observatory when they were young because he found the courage to go on his field trip. He even got a job there, and he and Sally are still together all these years later. All in all, it was a very nice, feel-good movie. I think it had a very strong start, and somewhat fell apart through the end of the second act, and had a much weaker third act, but it was still very fun and enjoyable. So yeah, I think it's really wonderful that movies like Orion in the Dark, Puss in Boots 2, Mitchells vs. the Machines, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, and of course, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse are getting more and more attention and are allowed to exist in their stylized ways. We can all agree that Disney movies are pretty, same with Pixar, but all their movies tend to look very similar, safe, even, boring if you're cynical. So it's nice to see that movies like Orion do well and are allowed to look weird and stylized and be charming like that. Though the way we're headed, I'm starting to feel like almost every animated movie is starting to look like this kind of textured, painted, drawn kind of thing, so it's more of a norm than something unusual, but I do prefer movies at least trying to look like something new instead of everything needing to be Disneyfied or looking hyper-realistic, so I'm happy to stick with this drawn illustration type art style rather than something flat and boring. I give this movie a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6. Give it a shot, it's on Netflix. Have you seen Orion in the Dark yet? What did you think of it? What is your favorite Dreamworks movie, and why is it How to Train Your Dragon? Shrek is also acceptable. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for spending some time with me. Leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. Follow me on my social medias here for sneak peeks into future videos. But that's all for today, folks, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! SIMBIB, stuff I make because I'm bored. Why does it bother me so much that the story explicitly states that Dark and the other entities aren't real because Orion made them up for Storyfor's kid? That doesn't make the story any more or less good.